perspective. Today's virtual tour is on Ben Gurion's desert home. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of visiting the home, today you get to see it. The home, also known as the hut, was David Ben Gurion's home on Kibbutz Sde Boker for his last 20 years of his life, together with his wife, Paula. I'm going to read a little bit about the institute that David Ben Gurion had the privilege and the honor of being named after, named for. The David Ben Gurion Heritage Institute is an educational body dedicated to spreading the legacy of Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben Gurion. The institute was established following the passing of the David Ben Gurion law in 1976, in memory of our famous first Vice Prime Minister, President, and his work with the goal to impart on the visions to future generations, notably us. In many years of activity as a national educational center, the Institute has provided visitors with both historical and contemporary perspectives while engaging in subjects such as Israeli society, Zionism, and leadership in the Negev. Additionally, the Institute addresses Ben Gurion's formative years and early vision, his political activity, and its relevance to modern Israeli society, and his impact as a national figure. So today's tour is brought to us by a very special lady, Esther Suissa, a native Londoner. You'll hear from the accent. She made Aliyah in 1986, an ex-JFS student. After studies in Jewish history and French at the Hebrew University, Esther lived in Dimona for 23 years. That's in its own right, needs an award. Oh, yeah. She represented the UJIA during that time, and in partnership with the regional director, and being the Partnership 2000, which is the organization at the time, regional director. Now living in Evan Shmuel, she works at Ben Gurion Heritage Institute at Sde Boker, overlooking David and Paula Ben Gurion's grave sites. Slightly different from Esther's childhood growing up in Hammersmith. Esther's married to Avi and has 5 children. So today we are honored to have Esther show us around a historical perspective, a political perspective at David Ben Gurion's home. Could I ask a little bit of housekeeping? Make sure that your devices are muted throughout. You will have the opportunity to ask questions. Please do so via the chat button at the top. We will hear from Esther, and right at the end, we will ask those questions to Esther. So please pay attention. Make sure you've got some good questions at the end. Have a cup of coffee, and we hope you enjoy. Esther, welcome.
Hi, shalom everybody. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction. So welcome here to Kibbutz Sde Boker. It's a lovely Sunday afternoon, very hot, and I'm looking forward to taking you around. Thanks to all my aunts and uncles who signed up. I'm joking, I only have 2. Thank you, and hi to everyone from ex-JFS. If there's anyone here from Hasmonean, please leave now. That's also a joke, and that's enough joke. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at Ben Gurion's home, talk about his Zionism, how Ben Gurion saw Zionism, and we're going to start with a short movie, an animated movie, and then see where he was buried. So see you on the other side.
David Ben Gurion. What do we really know about this short man, but of great stature? Strong-willed, visionary leader who liked to stand on his head. Ben Gurion was born in 1886 in Goat Alley in the Polish town of Plonsk, which is where he first dreamed of independence for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Even when he was still young, he was able to visualize the greater picture, and he understood that the Hebrew language was the basis through which to awaken patriotism among the Jews. So, in 1900, he and a few friends established the Ezra Youth Movement, The goal was to strengthen the knowledge of Hebrew in their town and also to teach the language to poor children. However, there was considerable opposition among the leaders of the Jewish community in Plonsk to Ezra's activities. About a year later, its members looked for other fields of activity, but Ben Gurion did not give up. He started his political journey by joining the Poalei Zion party and making Aliyah to the land of Israel in 1906. On his second day in the land of Israel, he started working in the orchards of Petach Tikva and strongly believed that Jews must work the land and settle the country. Ben Gurion understood that work and the laborers would be the key to promoting the struggle for independence. The working class would lead the nation. Ben Gurion worked tirelessly to realize his vision, the unification of all of workers in Israel into one organization. And in fact, in 1920, the various labor groups united and the General Federation of Workers in Israel, the Histadrut, was established. Ben Gurion was elected secretary a year after the Histadrut was established and remained one of its pioneering leaders. Under his leadership, the Histadrut and the workers became the backbone of Jewish settlement and the Zionist movement. Ben Gurion pursued his goal with determination and became the national leader who turned his vision into reality. In 1937, when the British proposed a plan for the partition of the land of Israel, Ben Gurion recognized that they were being offered a window of opportunity to establish the Jewish state, even if that meant a compromise over the size of the country. According to that same perception of the greater picture, Ben Gurion concluded that the establishment of the state depended first and foremost on its ability to defend it. Therefore, in 1946, he accepted the defense portfolio and conducted a seminar. He taught himself about the subject of security over several months and prepared the groundwork for establishing a regular army of Jews to defend the country, the IDF. On November 29, 1947, the United Nations approved the partition plan. But as Ben Gurion had feared, the War of Independence broke out very soon after that, and he undertook the leadership position. Ben Gurion understood that Jerusalem, which was under siege, was of huge symbolic and practical significance. So in the spring of 1948, he gave the command for Operation Nachshon to break through the siege of the city, and he insisted on concentrating forces from all over the country to this end. Despite the misgivings of the military commanders, after tenacious combat, the operation succeeded and became a turning point in the war. In May 1948, Ben Gurion declared independence, becoming the first prime minister of the State of Israel. He spearheaded a policy of ingathering of the exiles, and the population doubled within 4 years. Now, thousands of immigrants had to be settled, and Ben Gurion aspired to establishing an ideal society in the land of Israel. In 1953, Ben Gurion decided to retire from the premiership and to go up to Sde Boker in the Negev. Here, he yearned for a simple life, working the land. And he set about fulfilling another vision, pioneering and making the desert wilderness blossom. Thus, the boy who in Plonsk had dreamed of a Hebrew-speaking town became the leader who, against all odds, brought about the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Ben Gurion knew how to look into the future with determination and optimism, or in his own words, dare, persevere, succeed.
Hi everybody, here we are overlooking the amazing view of the Tzin Valley mentioned in the Bible, also in Bereshit, in Genesis and in Exodus. Ben Gurion sees this amazing view and says, this is where I want to be buried, and this is where he buries Paula in January 1968. So you see this amazing panoramic view, and now let's go and see what's written on their graves. Let's just move over here. As you can see, very few people here today. David Ben Gurion decides what's going to be written on the grave. Here is Paula. David passed away in October 1973. There are 3 dates on the graves. Usually what's written on the grave: date of birth, date of decease, date of death. And the third date that is written on it is the date of the Aliyah, when each one made Aliyah. Paula in 1919, David previously in 1906, because David Ben Gurion says the most important thing I ever did was to make Aliyah. So there are no titles, not the founder of Israel, not the prime minister, not the creator of the IDF, just his date of Aliyah. He said not everyone's going to be the prime minister, but everyone can make Aliyah. So from here, let's move on to the home.
Yeah, שומעים אותך.
So I hope you enjoyed the movie. As we said, it says at the end, dare, persevere, and succeed. And one of the things that we've learned during the coronavirus is that opportunity comes out of crisis. And one of the things that we learned from Ben Gurion, who during his years had many crises and always found an opportunity. He goes to Turkey to study law, doesn't manage to finish. He carries on. And basically what we learn here, hold on 1 minute. What we learn here is that there's always an opportunity in crisis. So here we are in Kibbutz Sde Boker, and you can have a look. If you look around, you can see Sde Boker, Leicester TV. You can see that it's not the usual desert that you think it is. It's not, you can see that it's green. You can see that there's a lot of greenery around. And we're about to go into his home, which he comes to, first of all, in 1953. He leaves the government. He'll go back to the government in 1955. But we'll move here finally, on and off. Finally, he'll move here in 1963 until he passes away in 1973. So we're going to move in now into the home. I have to say that between March and April, March and April, actually, we were closed. We reopened in May, and we're very happy that there are a few, not the same numbers of visitors, but we do have visitors here, and we want them to come. But we're going to go in now and see the actual home. No, the Ben Gurion mask, the Ben Gurion mask. Thanks to everybody for coming. Thanks for coming. Okay, so here we are. Here we are in the home. Here we are in the home of David Ben Gurion. We're in the balcony area. You can see very up-to-date, nostalgic, retro cups. And the big reason is why are we allowed in here? Who gave us permission to come and see Ben Gurion's home? So if we move over onto here, we actually see, let's see actually the will. And it says, Ben Gurion writes a will, and he says, it's my wish that after my death, the home of Sde Boker will be open to the general public, it will be served, and everything belongs to the public. And he asked that in his funeral not to have either any eulogies or any gun salvo. That's what he asks for. And the main thing that we're going to talk about today is, first of all, where is the Zionism in this home? Where is Judaism in this home? And what other elements can we see? Because Ben Gurion would have said that after the creation of the State of Israel, there's no more Zionism. Zionism means coming to live here. And he spoke about pioneering. He spoke about the importance of halutziut. For him to come to Sde Boker in 1953 at the age of 67 was a pioneering move. The irony is that he comes with his wife Paula, but no one really follows him. And even today, the Negev is 60%, which we're going to see, 60% of the country, but slightly less than 10% actually live here. So come inside. Before I said, notice the mezuzot. The mezuzah was actually placed after he passed away. Ben Gurion didn't have mezuzot during his lifetime. He actually says to Rabbi Goren, when Rabbi Goren says, but people come to visit you, you really need to have a mezuzah. And he says, in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, there's no need for a mezuzah. only in the diaspora. That was Ben Gurion. He wasn't an Orthodox Jew. I wouldn't call it, atheism is a bit of a tricky word. He sees the Bible as very important. He sees the importance of the land. He's not an Orthodox Jew. Let's go inside. We now have the whole house to ourselves. And one of the good things which came out of COVID-19 is that we're able to go over the ropes, which can't usually be done on a regular visit. And hopefully when you actually come, I hope some of you will come when hopefully all this is over and come and visit. On a regular visit, you can see everything from here. Today, we're going to go actually over the ropes. So have a look around. I don't know if this living room reminds you of parents or grandparents' living rooms. Remember, it's David Ben Gurion who decides what's going to be on display. Before he passes away, he decides what's going to be on display, what's going to be mainly gifts that he received over the years. And we're going to see his Judaism, the way he looked at life, and his Zionism. So we have a nice sitting area. And we're going to start really with the map. This map is from 1952. As you can see Tel Aviv here. You can see Jerusalem. And basically everything under Jerusalem, the Negev is pretty empty. There's a few kibbutzim. There's Kibbutz Revivim, Kibbutz Ruchama, some things in the Arava, some places, some settlements in the Arava, but basically very little. So when David Ben Gurion comes here with Paula in 1953, there's very little around. The roads are very primitive. It takes between 4 to 5 hours to get here from Tel Aviv, Jerusalem to here. Today it's around 2 hours, slightly less. So see how prominent the map is in his living room. Next, usually I would ask you who this is, but since we're a very large group, we actually have a portrait of Abraham Lincoln. We found it interesting that he decided to have, in particular, this portrait. He admired Abraham Lincoln, saw him as a very important leader. He freed the slaves. And we even find what we'll see soon is a number of leaders, and we'll see how they're somehow connected. They all have similar goals and similar achievements. Next to Abraham Lincoln, we have family photos. So it's a leader's home, but it's also a private home. Here we have Ben Gurion and his wife, Paula. Paula he met in 1915 in New York. She was from Eastern Europe. She was working as a nurse. They fell in love. In the diary entry in 1917, he writes, had a meeting with the Bund, a meeting with the Jewish community, marriage in City Hall at 12. By 2 o'clock, he'd already carrying on with his meetings. And that's Ben Gurion for you. No honeymoon or anything. And here are his children. He had 3 children, Amos, Geula, and Rana. Geula was the eldest. Amos was his only son. Notice the names. Geula meaning redemption. Amos named after the prophet. The 3 children, basically, it's Paula who brings them up. Ben Gurion really isn't around. None of them come to live in the Negev. They're already grown up. They have families already. So they just come to visit here, basically, on a regular basis. But no, none of them go into politics, and none of them move to the Negev. So aside to the private photos, we have others. We have a portrait of Plato. Ben Gurion learns classical Greek in London, actually, in the 1940s. In order to read in the original language, he's very interested in Greek philosophy. And we'll see other Greek philosophers as we go. Just a quick look at the corner. When we have young visitors, we ask them what this is. Some of them don't know that it's a telephone. I mean, I definitely I remember it. Others won't. He had a telephone. He hated the telephone. He said it interrupted him. One of the reasons why he comes to Sde Boker is to get away from all the cacophony and from all the noise. and the phone actually disturbs his reading, his studying, his writing letters. But that was the phone. And if you look down over here at the menorah, a Jewish symbol, of course, he decides that that's going to be the national Israeli symbol. And it actually plays Hatikva. We won't play today because it's slightly rusty, but the menorah actually plays Hatikva. We're carrying on. We're going to see different gifts here. First of all, we have the TV. TV was actually made by an Israeli company, given to him as a present. Ben Gurion writes to thank the donor for the television. He says, I think television will actually destroy the younger generations. Doesn't turn it on. So it'd be interesting what he would say today with all our technology and all our social media. So he has a TV, doesn't really watch it. And now I want to show you, we talked about his Judaism. We saw the menorah. We'll see another one soon. He's also a man of the world. First of all, we have the Hanukkah. We have another Hanukkah. Hanukkah for him is a very symbolic festival. He sees Hanukkah as a symbol of how the Jewish minority beats the non-Jewish majority. So Hanukkah is a very special festival for him. But around it, we have a lot of objects from some of his visits. He's very interested in Islam. He's interested in Buddhism. He goes to the Far East. We have a lot of gifts there, a lot of souvenirs that he collects on the way. We have a Burmese temple. He goes to Burma in 61, today Myanmar, and he visits the Prime Minister UNU, becomes very friendly, spends a month actually learning about Buddhism. So there's Buddhism, there's Judaism. He's learning about the world. So even though he says that we should be an skula, we should be a light upon the nations, we need to learn about the nations as well. Slightly up, we have an interesting character. Usually I would ask what people thought this is. Yes, it's a koala bear. Probably left by one of his grandchildren. But we say that it reminds us a bit of his hair. So we kept it here and it was placed on the lampshade just to give us a reminder. And we move on. Zionism and Judaism. Here we have different gifts he received over the years. Presents from abroad, from the King David High School in South Africa, the Jewish war veterans in New York, 1970. He quotes from Micha. What is good? What should the Lord request of you? To be humble, to walk humbly with thy God. He found that quote pasuk very, very important. And beneath it, we have another gift which he received from Holocaust survivors. I don't know if you can notice it, but it's actually Jonah inside the whale. And what he says, what they say to him in the letter that they send with the gift is that just as Jonah found refuge and he reached a safe haven, so you created Israel and you have created a safe haven for us. So he was very touched by that, and he kept it in his living room. Jonah and the whale. So there's a lot of biblical references, a lot of biblical objects. Before we leave, anyone recognize what we're looking at now? Yes, it's the Declaration of Independence, a copy given to Ben Gurion on his 80th birthday by Golda Meir. Golda Meir, who admired Ben Gurion greatly. Towards the end, they were political rivals. Ben Gurion didn't agree with the way Golda ran and worked politically, but there was still a great deal of admiration. And he decides to put this in his living room. And as you can see, the curtains actually, one of the things which I didn't mention is everything here is pretty much, everything here is authentic. some of for instance, if you look at the floor, those who know Israel, this is how the floors used to look in many houses in Israel in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and we only replaced the tiles which are broken. So we try to keep everything as authentic as possible. For instance, the curtains, we saw photographs of the actual home. We sent the photograph to Shenkar, to the fashion college, and they created the same material based on the photo. So that's a remake, but based on the authentic ones. If you have questions, keep them. I'll be happy to answer them later. And this was his living room. So you could say this was his public area. So we have a leader's home, but we also have a very private home. And what was Ben Gurion trying to convey to us when he said, this house should be open to the public. We're going back over the ropes. Hopefully the alarm system won't start buzzing. Here we are in the foyer. Some of you may have noticed we're in quite a bigger house than you'd usually expect as a kibbutz. We'll talk about that later. We always ask people who come here, modest home, is this not a modest home? We'll discuss that towards the end. But look what he decides to put on display here. A Magen David, of course, a Jewish but also a Zionist symbol. Personal photographs of the family, of Amos, of Paula, one of the children, with the children. We have a Hadassah certificate in 1972. He received a certificate from Hadassah, from Canada, where they adopt a child in his honor. And I want to go back to one special exhibit that we have here. Notice the menorah. It's David Ben Gurion who decides that this is going to be the symbol of the state of Israel. But it's actually 3D, and it was a gift from an artist in Haifa in the 1960s. If you go to each side, on the one side, perhaps you can see is actually the figure of David Ben Gurion. But if you go to the other side, I'm not sure if you can try and recognize who that is. 2 seconds. And it's actually Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, who was the second president of the State of Israel. They were very close. They both made Aliyah in the second Aliyah in 1906. And this was a gift he received. You know what? From here, we're going to go into his private areas, and then we'll go back to the Holy of Holies. So here you can see quite a wide area. In fact, what happens is that it comes back in 1960, 1961, and the house is extended. It's realized that people are going to come and visit. To have a regular kibbutz home was a bit too small. So this house is actually 2 kibbutz houses together. So there are 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and quite a wide corridor. But one thing that always stands out when you come to visit is a globe. I used to have a globe at home. It used to be very small, and we used to blow it out to see where the world was. Look how big the globe is. It was actually a present given to him by General Bradley, an American general, who gave it to him as a present in 1952. We actually thought it was from 1947, but then we saw the India is here and Pakistan, so we realized it was much later. Since then, we've placed a perspective, not because of Corona, but because people used to touch it, and it started making the names go a bit fuzzy. So we've placed it here. And one of the things that we say is, he's living in the desert, he's far away from Tel Aviv, he doesn't like using the phone, and yet he has this global awareness. He knows that the world is very important. He can't cut himself completely. And it's similar to what we are doing, where we are now. We're in Sde Boker. you're in London, you're in Manchester, you're around the UK, and yet here we are together for this very intimate and close visit to the old man, or the founder of Israel's actual home. And if you want to get an idea of how tall he was, I'm going to ask Galit, my lovely assistant, to show you a picture of a photo of Ben Gurion standing with his back to the globe, so you can get an idea. Now I'm about 5'6", 5'7". He was around 5 foot, 5'1", very short, very big head, by the way. We'll see some other personal possessions, but he was very short. And the irony, and that's important, because when Ben Gurion was at his height, the late 1940s, the 1950s, people don't really see Ben Gurion. They hear him on the radio, they read about him in the newspaper. Some people meet him, of course, but many see him as this giant. And he was a giant, but in very small terms. And since we're here, let's go into the kitchen. Again, something that we don't usually do. Maybe some of you who are perhaps in Israel in the 1960s, 70s, feel that this is something familiar to them. First of all, the fact that there's a kitchen in a kibbutz home is already an anomaly. But Paula comes here, she insists on cooking for Ben Gurion. So she's cooking. Anything here? No, nothing to eat. This was his diet week. So there's a stove, there's a fridge, which is quite unusual, at least in the 1950s. Tea set, never forget the tea set. Okay, we have a tea set. Oh my God, if I break it, that will be the end of my career here in the Ben Gurion Desert Home. So here's a tea set, very similar to what my mother used to have. 2 sinks, not because of kashrut that you might think. 2 sinks, one for soapy water, one for regular water. That's how they used to clean dishes at the time. And behind us is the interesting part. Last week I gave a similar tour to a group of American teenagers, and then one of the teenagers shouted out, "Look, he had a ninja." Okay, so he had a ninja blender. Of course, it wasn't called ninja at the time, but also very unusual. What did Paula make him in the blender? She would make him a sort of smoothie made out of raspberry syrup, a fresh egg, yogurt, apple puree. She would blend it, and every morning Ben Gurion would have his kuchmuch. And here we can actually see, for those who read a bit of Hebrew, we can actually see over here the actual recipe for kuchmuch, what should be placed in it. And that he had every single day. When Paula died in January 1968, which affected him greatly, he was convinced that Paula would outlive him, because that's what he read in the books, in all the books. He continued having the kuchmuch. And his children said, "But Dad, you don't actually like it. You don't have to have it anymore." And he said to them, "Out of respect and out of love for your mother, I'll continue having it." So Ben Gurion continues with the kuchmuch and has it on a regular basis every day. His medicines, we've got all his medicines here. We've got the list of his meals. And this was his kitchen. It's not Golda Meir's kitchen, where she had all her political discussions, but it's a kitchen all the same. So what have we seen so far? We've seen a sort of Jewish home. We've seen Chanukiahs. We've seen Magen David. We've seen a lot of universal objects. Now let's go into one of the bedrooms. And if you are here, I'm not sure how many books you have next to your bedside table. But here we have between 40 to 50 books. We even have the book which is open on the actual page where it's left it. And if you are here, I would say to you, whose bedroom do you think this is? So I can sort of hear you all the way from the UK. And I'm sure that some of you are saying, this room belonged to David Ben Gurion. And that's correct. This was David Ben Gurion's room. He has Band-Aids. He has his books. The book was open just before he passed away. Notice the single bed. And also notice the height of the windows. The windows were bought especially, built especially in order to be slightly higher than his height, so that it would avoid, in order to, for security purposes, so that he wouldn't, there wouldn't be assassination attempts. It was actually built according to his height. What else do we have here? We have the books. We have a safe. What was in the safe? You're probably asking. So no, there weren't millions of dollars there. There was actually a lot of classified documents. Ben Gurion is still defense minister when he comes here in the mid-50s. And these documents had to be placed in a safe. So you can understand why. His shoes. These are Ben Gurion's actual slippers. I'm not going to try them on. So even though he was actually very short, he had a very, very big shoe size. His wardrobe. Ben Gurion wasn't interested in clothes. He had to wear clothes because it's something he had to wear. But just to show you something, and again, this is something that you don't usually see. We have the suit with the long coat, something you'd see at, this he wears for the Anglo-American Committee for Palestine. He wears it to the St. James's Conference in 1941. So there's definitely a lot of history behind it. This he nicks, or he borrows. This is a British war jacket. He actually is in the British Army in 1917, 1918. He doesn't get very far. He stays as a private. He's still got the British jacket, the army jacket. And his favorite, you could say actually his favorite dress was just wearing shorts, khaki top, trousers. Was really not interested in wearing very classy clothes, but of course he had to sometimes. And this we still have. We preserve them. Don't forget we've got his dressing gown. Not going to try it on. And there are his clothes. So if he wasn't interested in clothes,
20 to 4.
Okay, so if I would say what picture was in Ben Gurion's home, we have a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. Unusual choice. Mahatma Gandhi lives at the same time as Ben Gurion. They never meet, they exchange letters. For Ben Gurion, Mahatma Gandhi is one of the most important leaders of the time, non-violence. In the same way as Ben Gurion leads the people to independence from the British, Gandhi does the same for the Indian people. So the only picture he has in his room is actually of Mahatma Gandhi. We're going to go very briefly.
It's good. It's fine.
So if Ben Gurion's room was everything is has a purpose. This is a much more feminine room. We have pictures of the children. If you look down on the table, different drawings, which when my kids were small, you always throw some of them away, and you leave some of them. So you have drawings of the grandchildren, family pictures. And you even have a very unusual picture of Ben Gurion hugging one of his granddaughters, which was above her bed. The big question, which we're always asked, why did they have separate rooms? So they had separate rooms. One reason, because Ben Gurion basically didn't sleep. He slept between 2 to 3 hours a night, had to take sleeping pills sometimes. He doesn't sleep. It's much more convenient for Paula and David to have separate bedrooms. It's also very common. My parents at a certain age had separate bedrooms.
Really?
For someone who's been married for quite a while, I always tell the teenagers, I highly recommend it. Separate bedrooms. It's a recipe for a long and happy marriage. But that's just my opinion. The bathroom. And now we'll go into the most important room. Everyone needs a bathroom to be still a human being, has his own bathroom. Notice that there are no guest rooms. So when the United Nations Secretary General came here, Paula gave him her room. She went to stay at a friend in the kibbutz, came the next morning, and Ben Gurion had no idea how they'd managed. It wasn't interesting. He wasn't interested in how people stayed over. He was interested in much more higher, lofty issues, but that's another example. And then we come into the Holy of Holies, the last room. If we spoke about leaders, we've seen Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi. The third leader, we're here in the library now. The third leader who we see here is, if you can see above, this is a statue of Moses, Michelangelo's Moses, which was placed here. So Moses also brought the Jewish people to their promised land. And Ben Gurion sits on that very modest table and is always facing Moses. The story goes is that when he received a statue of himself, he refused to have it in this room. He said, there's no way there can be a statue of me and a statue of Moses in the same room. So he takes his away. Try and guess how many books in this room. I'll give you a few seconds. How many books are here? I can hear you shouting. First of all, there are books in 9 languages that I can tell you. Ben Gurion learns to read 9 languages. And there are 5,000 books. Ben Gurion never finishes any university degree, but everything he learns is through his books. So there are 5,000 books here. If anyone's been to his Tel Aviv home, there are another 22,000 books there. Wherever he goes, the first place he goes to is the bookstore. He's obsessed with reading, and that's what he does mainly, especially during the nights. And here again, going over the ropes, we can see his table. We can see folders, which are actually empty. Many of them are classified documents which were sent to the IDF archives after his death. We have the radio, which one of the children last week from Pennsylvania were convinced was a suitcase. So no, it's not a suitcase, it's a radio. His very fashionable glasses today. A Hebrew-English dictionary. I always find that interesting because I remember learning Hebrew with that same dictionary about 30, 35 years ago. Tanakh, he has his Bible. And basically he has a lot of books on practically everything, apart from books on sport, on cooking, fiction. He's interested in facts, he's interested in history, philosophy, science. And this is where he spends most of his time, in the time from 1953 to 1973, with certain periods where he goes back to become a prime minister, and he comes back and forth. If you just want to,
some people have the same dictionary.
The dictionary is it always moves me to see the dictionary. There's a picture of there's a small Buddha to show he's interested in Buddha, and there's another plaque of Zenon. A few more things before we finish, and we're going to open up for questions. Here, if you just want to come around here, there's a picture, a photograph of Berl Katzenelson. Berl Katzenelson was a very close friend of Ben Gurion. He's basically the ideologue of Israeli socialism. He died very young. He died in 1944. And it was one of the few times that Ben Gurion actually cried and said, "My only true friend is dead." Ben Gurion didn't have a lot of friends. He had a lot of political enemies. He's not interested about being politically correct. When people used to visit him in the 1960s from abroad, and he'd say to them, okay, when are you making aliyah? He would say directly to them, when are you making aliyah? And they said, well, you know, we're helping from outside Israel. He'd say, make aliyah. That was, aliyah for him was the greatest thing you could do, as is written on his grave. Just to show you how it looked during his time, some of the children asked how it's pretty clutterish, very, very messy, and that's Ben Gurion whilst he's still alive. I think what we're going to do now, so this is really, for him, the Holy of Holies. As I said, he wasn't a religious man. In 1959, he sends, just after Yom Kippur, he sends a message to the radio. He said the Prime Minister did not fast on Yom Kippur, but stayed at home. So for some reason, he had this urge, this will to tell everybody, to tell us the state of Israel, the people, that he didn't fast, but he stayed at home. But he knows the prophets, he knows his Bible, and for him, Judaism is much wider than just a religion. And that's the essence of his Zionism and the essence of his pioneering spirit as well. And what we're going to do now, on our way back, whilst I'm going to answer some questions again. As you see, here we are on our own. I'm going to make my way back to answer questions. So please, if you have them, let me know. Ben Gurion comes here. The cynics say that he comes here because he's tired, because he's fed up of politics. But in his diaries, which we have 20,000 pages of his diaries in the Midrashah, about 3 miles from here in the archive, he writes every day from the age of 17 until his last years. He writes every day. And he writes in his diary, I have to do a pioneering act. This is Zionism. Zionism is now coming to settle the Negev, making it blue and bringing people here. So you can say, was his vision realized? Not realized. On the one hand, we have less than 10% of the population living in the Negev. On the other hand, we have science. We have Ben Gurion University in Beersheba. We have another branch in the Midrashah. People come from all over the world to learn about desert studies at Ben Gurion University. So the idea of having an Oxford University and the Yavne have definitely been realized. The numbers are still low. So a vision probably takes a longer time to take place. As we're walking out, everyone say goodbye to Ben Gurion's home. We're going to go via statue, and then we're going to open the floor up for questions. As you can see, it's pretty deserted now. People have started coming back, but in small numbers. Hopefully, people will carry on coming. And as you can see, there's a lot of gardening. We place a lot of emphasis during his lifetime. Already a lot of gardening here. And before we open recognize this. By his mid-50s, Ben Gurion feels that he's starting to forget things. He has a lot of back trouble. Dr. Moses Feldenkrais tells him, you need to walk 5 kilometers a day and stand on your head every day. And if you do so, your health will improve. And that's what he does. He learns how to stand on his head. And this is what he does every day. And one of the things that we say, he didn't just stand on his head physically, he also stands on his head metaphorically. He always looks for a different way of solving a problem. A regular person would think in a certain way, could always think in a different way. And that's why standing on his head is very symbolic. So we're going to walk back to sit over there. So we're going to sit down, and answer any questions.
There were a few questions in the chat.
Thanks. Thank you so much. I'll direct some questions to you, both from the chat and from other sources.
Perfect.
Thank you. I know you can hear. Esther, can you hear me as well?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Fantastic. A real privilege for us. What a fantastic tour. Thank you so much. Hugely knowledgeable. And there really would be 1,000 questions. So we're going to come down to a few questions, if that's all right. Let's start off with the first one. David Ben Gurion's vision for Israel was a secular state. Is that the same type of secular state as other states are today?
So the idea of religion and secularism is very interesting because it's actually Ben Gurion who creates the status quo. It's 1949, 1950. He has to, even before the creation of the state, he wants to show the British that the Jewish people is united. So he's with the Chazon Ish. And they come to an agreement that the number of young men who are studying Torah won't go into the military; they're exempted. And two, that the halakha or Judaism will actually be what decides in the state. In 1972, Ben Gurion says, "I made two mistakes. One is that there's no constitution in Israel, and even today there's no constitution. Two is the exemption I give to the military, to the ultra-Orthodox, to the Haredim, not to go into the military." And we can say that this is a decision which actually affects us today. Then Ben Gurion freed around 800 young men. He was convinced that ultra-Orthodoxy would slowly disappear. Today, we're talking about tens of thousands of young men who don't go to the army. It came up in the recent elections. So that decision was very central. And the fact that marriage, divorce, the fact that there isn't public transport on Shabbat, even the fact that the IDF has to be kosher. Ben Gurion decides that the IDF has to be kosher. So even though he's not a religious Jew, he feels that there has to be a religious base of the country. And today we're dealing with the repercussions, the fact that those who convert by reform Judaism here have a hard time, the fact that everything is run through the rabbinate. So even though he's a secular Jew, he wants the state. There's no division of state and religion. And at one point, he has a real argument with Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich, who wants a clear distinction between religion and state. And Ben Gurion says there can't be a division of religion and state. So it's there's a personal level and a public level. Yeah.
Very good. Tell us about the kibbutz itself today. Is it running as a kibbutz with product? Is it privatized or is it still government funded?
So today there are 450 members in the kibbutz. They have chicken coops. They have a mask and tape factory. The joke goes that Saddam Hussein actually saved the kibbutz in 1991 when there was an order to tape up. Everyone had to tape up their windows. This is when the kibbutz made their big startup. Today there are no children's homes. Today the communal dining room is privatized, but everything else is still a kibbutz. And in a month's time, there's going to be a new hotel right next to the desert home, and hopefully it will help also the kibbutz, and also more people will come to the desert home as a result.
Very good. Could you elaborate on Ben Gurion's children and grandchildren? Do we know much about them? Have any of them gone into politics or anything else? Okay,
so Geula was a teacher. Amos actually headed the Ata textile factory. Sorry, we've got planes flying overhead. We're near an Air Force base. Galit's husband, who's filming us, her husband is a pilot, so she's very excited.
Very good.
So Geula, she stays in Tel Aviv. Renana will move to Haifa. Ranana becomes a doctor of microbiology. Amos is the head of a textile factory, and then he becomes the deputy commissioner, the deputy police commissioner. None of them move to the Negev. None of them get involved in politics. And basically, they said that they didn't have a father. Amos doesn't celebrate
the grandchildren.
They don't celebrate his bar mitzvah. The grandchildren. So we have some of the grandchildren are in touch with us. One of them, Alon Ben Gurion, moved to the United States during Ben Gurion's lifetime. One of the things that made him very sad was that his grandson moved to the United States. He's still there. He comes to visit us. The great-grandchildren come to visit. Every year on the 1st of December, there's a national memorial service, and the family usually come to visit. But no one came to the Negev. No one got into politics. They saw what it did to their father and grandfather and decided they were out of it. There's one grandson called Dr. Yariv Ben Eliezer. Unfortunately, today in very bad health. He is a professor of communications. At some point, he was angry at us. He thought that we were just trying to make millions out of his grandfather's name. We tried to persuade him that that's not the case. And Dr. Moshe Ben Eliezer, Geula's son, is also in touch with us, and he's the head of the Ben Gurion home in Tel Aviv.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. A couple of more personal questions. Did David and Paula ever marry halachically? And do we know not much about Paula's life?
So they married halachically when they came here. They married in City Hall in 1917. They were married halachically here. It's interesting. I'll speak about Paul in one. When his son Amos joins the Royal Air Force, meets an Irish nurse called Mary in the Second World War. They decide to get married. And when they come to Ben Gurion and say, Amos wants to get married, but she's not one of us, Ben Gurion's reply was, even if she's a revisionist, that's fine. Because for Ben Gurion, not one of us is not one of us politically. And when they told him that she wasn't Jewish, he said, that's fine. Mary was converted by a Reform rabbi. And later she was converted by a conservative rabbi. It led to issues in the 1960s. Paula is a very interesting character. And sometimes we feel that we don't give her as much attention as she deserves. Paula herself wanted to be a doctor. She wasn't able to because of monetary problems. So she becomes a nurse. She's actually an atheist. She has no connection to Judaism when she meets Ben Gurion. She's definitely not a Zionist. But when they fall in love, Ben Gurion says to her, you have to come to the land of Israel, to Palestine. And she drops everything and she comes. She was actually an admirer of Emma Lazarus, the prominent feminist in the early 20th century. And Paula, as soon as the children are born, basically gives up her career, looks after the children, doesn't go back to work. When Ben Gurion says to Paula, we really should have 4 children, because one of the things that he does when the state is created is that you need to have a lot of children. He tells the people in Israel, you need at least 4 children. And Paula says to him, I bring up the children, I decide, we're sticking at 3. And that's what she decides. So they do sort of, they actually go fall apart. They don't fall apart. They actually grow apart during the years when Ben Gurion is at his height. And in 1953, when Ben Gurion says, I'm moving to Sde Boker, you don't have to come with me, Paula says, I'll come. And she actually hates it here. She doesn't have her friends from Tel Aviv. All the kibbutz members are at least 40 years younger than her. But Ben Gurion is so touched by that gesture is that he dedicates one of his books with a quote from Jeremiah, Lechtech acharai bamidbar, you followed me into the desert, and I will always remember that kindness. So he really appreciates it. And the last years, they grow closer again after being apart for a long time. So Paula is interested in herself, and sometimes we feel we don't give her enough place. So that's Paula for you.
That's very interesting. And then, did Ben Gurion have any close relationships with any Arab leaders? And what was his view with Palestinian leaders at the time?
Right. So this reminds me, if anyone has seen, or I hope if you haven't seen, then I very much recommend it. There's a wonderful film called Ben Gurion Epilogue. Sorry? Ben Gurion Epilogue, where he talks about his ties with the Palestinian leaders. He talks about his personal life. So if anyone hasn't seen it, I very much recommend it. On the one hand, he says there's no Palestinian people. He said that already in the mid-60s. In 1967, he's against openly fighting the Arab armies. Moshe Dayan and the security leadership don't listen to him. And we know about the victory of the Six-Day War. He says things like the Bedouins. He knows that there are Bedouins in the Negev, and he says, I think we should actually convert them to Judaism, which wasn't really an option at the time. And what he says, though, after the Six-Day War, he says, if I had to choose between true peace and giving back territories, I would give back territories for true peace, apart from Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. That's something that he says over and over again. So on the one hand, he has ties with Arab leaders, and you'll see that if you see the film Ben Gurion Epilogue. On the other hand, he keeps the military administration in force until 1964. In the south, many of the Arab Bedouins are in a military regime and have to report to the military until 1964. So it's not, it's complex. He actually, one of the languages that he doesn't learn, he tries to learn, but he doesn't, is Arabic. And he relies on Moshe Sharet to be his Arab interpreter. So even though he knew 9 languages, Arabic wasn't known. So towards the end, he actually regrets not having more ties. He has certain ties. He admires the Jordanian leadership. He meets some of them secretly, but he says, there was no Palestinian people, but if I had to return territories for peace, then I would do so. I'm trying to look at. I'm just reading some of the comments. Yes. Anything else?
No, so I mean that's pretty fantastic, and you've given us a wonderful view, a short view, but wonderful view of Ben Gurion and his life, his wife and children, the place where he lived. It brings us a little bit closer to Israel, even from this far away. And he was so against technology. Here we are via Zoom, doing a tour around his life. It must be ironic, and I'm sure he's looking down thinking, maybe that was the third thing I got wrong.
That's true. That's very true. I mean, it's something that we discovered really as a result of the coronavirus. And we said, wow, you know, even with all the difficulties, the fact that, you know, soldiers who used to come here and school children and everything's really been put on hold, we have this amazing way of connecting and really feeling, you know, that, you know, you're actually here with me and you're asking questions and you're tens of thousands of miles away. So I completely agree. For us, it's a real, it's an honor, it's a zechut. And I think actually Ben Gurion probably he would have regretted what he said about technology, because if it brought him closer, and this is what he wanted to do. He wanted the people to see the Negev, to see himself, to see less himself, but to talk about vision, to talk about pioneering. So and a startup nation, as you're mentioning. And thank you for the opportunity.
So in that light, in the Ben Gurion light of him saying you need to come to Israel, this cannot be your route to Israel, this Zoom seminar. What we want all our viewers to do is to come see the house, touch and feel and see it for themselves. I'm sure being there is entirely different to doing it via Zoom. And when you do go and visit Esther, and Esther will take you around. So Esther, on behalf of all of us, on behalf of the Zionist Federation of the UK and Ireland, on behalf of the WZO, World Zionist Organization in the UK, we want to thank you, Esther Suissa. We want to thank the Ben Gurion Heritage Institute for this wonderful, wonderful event this afternoon. I'd just like to remind our viewers to please follow the ZF and the WZO, because we have regular, fantastic seminars and webinars and Zoom meetings. So please log on to see us, what we're doing. Our next event will be Zionism in British Modernist Architecture. So that should be interesting. That's on the 23rd of July at 7 p.m. Please register and you will be able to see Zionism all around Britain, which should be instant. Esther, you're welcome to log in as well. Maybe we can take you on a tour around that. So Esther, phenomenal job, keeping it alive, keeping history alive, understanding where we come from and maybe where we should be going. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you again. Thank you to all the ex-JFS members who are writing to me. And I'll just say one more thing. If anyone's in Warrington Crescent in Maida Vale, there's a plaque of where David Ben Gurion lived during the war years. He actually said, when he saw how everyone was behaving in the Blitz, he said, the English people is a remarkable people. He actually thinks they're much braver than the Americans, but if there are any Americans here, I'm sorry about the insult. And he actually says, the one thing we should learn from England is a jury system. So he learns a lot even from England. So if anyone's in Maida Vale, look for the plaque because it's there.
That's wonderful. Esther, you've been amazing. I've been Paul Charney, Chairman of the Zionist Federation. You, the audience, have been engaged and have been attentive. So we thank you for that. Please log on to see us soon. Goodbye and stay safe.
Bye. Thanks for everything. But love to everybody. Say hi to the
Queen. Thank you so much from the
thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've made my day.
So well informed.
Thank you.
You are so well informed. It was very interesting. Josephine from Bournemouth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vivian from Maida Vale.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.